Guys, we have 10,000 plus visitors, viewers during last 20 hours of our Node.js Summit. This is incredible. Like, this is covering the whole world. And actually, the next speaker is also very international guy because he originally from America and now he lives, as I understand, in Europe. So we are waiting for Marcus, who is already with us. Good morning, Marcus.
Good morning. Hey.
Hey, good morning. I know that Marcus actually started to developing some Node.js very early, like 7 years ago. And it was like the first when JavaScript was just something very wild web thing that not a lot of people like too much, actually. And actually, Marcus was very much focused on backend with PHP and Java backend. But then the JS in backend was much prettier than in the browser. And so, as like many of us fall in love, and after experiencing, he started to participate in Meetups in São Paulo and took part in administration of NodeBR. It's a user group, the community in Brazil. From NodeBR, he was organizing the Node conference in Brazil, with first Node conference actually in South America. So, and actually, as many of us, and great that we have Marcus here, he loves to share with the community because he worked for many companies in Brazil, from startups to huge enterprises before moving to Poland. And actually, the morning starts in Europe. That's why, Marcus, thank you for being with us this very morning. We can't wait to hear your presentation, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Andrei. It's a pleasure to be with you guys today. I know that for some of you it might be night still, especially if you're seeing it from South America and Asia, probably. And for you, good night, and for the ones in Europe, good morning. So let me start my presentation. So today I would like to give you some introduction to logging in Node.js. And okay, so who I am. As Andrei said, I'm Marcus Bérgamo. Currently, I'm a lead software engineer at EPAM. I'm nowadays doing more like front end with React and web components, and as much as I can, I'm trying to write some code in Node.js. And I'm leading some teams here as well. But today is other thing. So you can find me on any social network at the Bérgamo. So what can I expect to see in this talk today? So I will be talking mostly about what is logging, when should I log, how should I log, and things that you can do after having those things properly set before. So, what is logging? It's not only the logs that you see on the screen, for sure. So we're talking about more technical ones. Most of us start thinking about such important thing in consequence of the first bug in our application. With time, it starts to be more natural, but if you're starting, you might not see that much value in just in the beginning. Start adding logs everywhere to enable you to have more information about your system later. So it's important to have it since the beginning. But if you're like starting in Node.js or in any other development stuff, you will not see how much useful is it before you find your first bug. So putting it simple, what is logging is it's information about your app, what's happening during the execution, and it will give you information to know how to improve your system. So again, it's a book of records of your system. Whatever you have some bug, whatever you need to understand some behaviors that your application, logs will give you most information for that. And you can arguing with me. Come on, I see the code. It's fine. It should work correctly based on this or that input. So why it's not working? Yeah, usually, at least in my experience, I found it quite challenging. Sometimes you see that the code it's working fine, the logic on it's pretty solid, but sometimes the user finds a way to create bugs on our systems. It's not our fault, of course, it's the user fault. I'm kidding. But when you find such case with the login on that, the proper login, you will see what's happening for inside your application at that time to see, oh, I was not expecting, I don't know, for instance, this value to be undefined, or this value to be null, or something like that. So you will know it after taking a look into your logs. So it will see why it's providing the wrong output. And also it will give you many more clues about what's going on. So yeah, talking about that logs are important, and we should log important information about our system to provide ourselves some later on more clues about the possible problems. It's fun. It's just easy to say that, but from my experience, it was hard to know upfront when I should log something, when this information might be important, and it's not that easy. Sometimes you might think that you're logging too little. Sometimes you might think you're logging too much, or bloating your system with logs, and you might face some issues with the std out, for example. And just one more thing: when you have these logs in place, you can transform it. You can transform it into some metrics that you can use to diagnose it also in the future more proactively, not waiting for bugs. But metrics is another topic for another talk, for sure. Talking about information, what's considered important to know on our system? And to answer these questions, we need to know one important concept on logs, that are log levels. So what are log levels in this context? They are a way to categorize your logs by severity. So often tools define some different levels, just changing the convention, the naming for those. But the more common ones that you might see in almost all the libraries that you have in Node.js, you will see the error level, warning, info, and debug. So this will help you to categorize the logs you have in your system. And for example, when you are running your application, you might don't need to see the debugs logs, for example. So you can just see the info one, the warning, and error. And usually those tools provide you ability to set this, and we'll see it in the future in some future slides. So let's try to explain what are those levels that we see on the screen. I don't want to debate what level you should use if something might be an error fatal warning or whatever, because this is endless discussion, so it's kind of tricky. But if you're like starting and you might don't know what if you should log something as warning or just error, I will give you some briefly understanding of in which case you should use one or another, for just in case to give you some information on that. But I don't want to, if you say something is warning, it's up to you, or something is error. So let's start from top to bottom. So error. From my perspective, I usually consider something as error when I can't recover it and I need someone to handle that. For example, you are trying to save something in your database, and after a few retries, the database is still not answering it. So you cannot push the data to the database. It might be some outage on the database. So you need someone to act on it. That might be a case for an error, for example. And in case of warning, it should be used to inform that something exceptional is happening, but this situation is still under control. So, for example, if you're, again, the database example, if you're trying to save something in your database, updating or whatever, or even reading, and it's retrying the first time, it might be useful to say, hey, I'm retrying it, but the first one, it was not okay. So you log some warning for later, no. But on the second time, it returns the information that you need, so it's fine. You can work on that. So, and and then we have the info one. So info is basically to show you some information, as the name says. So you could log some information about requests, information about inputs, so that you're giving to your user. You can use this for kind of getting information to save some kind of statistics for the usage of your user. So later on, you could have some application that will read those logs in information and get the ones that are related to access to your system. So you can see the which path the user access requested, which was the status code, the endpoint, and some other information that you might find useful after understanding the usage of this. And the last one, that it's mostly used when something wrong happened and you need to know more. So in the bug, it's let's be honest, most of the times you have the bugs when you're running your code locally and find some bug, you're putting some swearing words on that to show your frustration that, come on, why this piece of awesome engineering is not working? Why I'm putting this variable and the output is not the one that I'm expecting? Of course, after leaving the raging mode, you can just remove those swearing words and make it more professional. So yeah, remember to remove those after alleviating your stress, and then commit. But yeah, for debugging, it's mostly the case to that when you're receiving some information and you need to give to the user, give to yourself some more clues about what's going on. Usually you enable this level when you're debugging something that can be reproducible on the code. So in your development stage, for example, you will enable the debug mode and see the requests coming that are causing some problems. So that's the main use. You have like many other log levels that you can leverage. For example, fatal the system itself is unrecoverable, or even trace to give some trace information to you. But there are a lot, and usually in the log library that you use, it will give you also some ideas and what's available. You can even customize those log levels based on your preferences or some specific case that you want to see. And yes, and again, you can ask me, but Marcos, I have console module in Node.js standard library. I'm using it for log. It's not enough. Well, you're half a way to go in this case, but console is not the best way to achieve such behaviors. Even as we have some kind of representation of those levels inside it, you have console log, you have console info, you have console warning, you have console error, and even console trace. But there are two main problems with such approach. First of all, if you look into the console documentation in Node.js, it has some warning to use that. It's fine for when you're like just debugging and don't want to push it, but you'll see the warning that will say something like that. So like the global console is neither consistently synchronous like the browser APIs they might resemble, nor they're consistently asynchronous like all other Node.js streams. And I will leave the comment, the links for this information in the presenter notes, so you can take a look on that. But basically, what's said, you shouldn't rely on that. Sometimes you might lose some logs because of this, and it makes the code slow sometimes. I remember that in the beginning, like around 2015, it was the range of like when you have some console in production, let's say, and you see the code with and without it was like 10-20% faster if you remove those consoles that were like blocking the event loop just to print some bullshit information. But again, that's happened. These problems with console log happens especially on console log and console error, because internally they just send the data to std out and std error, and those are synchronous writes to avoid some problems caused by some backward compatibility on other systems. Another problem I mentioned too. So you can disable some levels of those logs if you're using just console log. It's tempting, but you just can't. You don't want to, if you're saving this information, for example, in some files, and you're paying for its storage or paying for some service, like we'll talk about it later, but for instance, if you are paying for the amount of logs that you are dispatching to some service for those logs, it doesn't make any sense to just put everything that you have on those services. Like you're logging some trace information that might be useful only for a short period of time when you're doing something specific with that, or just debug information. Well, it not pays off to just have this information all the time. So when you're not using console and you're using some proper log library, you can leverage the power to just, okay, information level, it's fine for me. If something is warning or error, it's important also, so it will be like bottled to the top of the importance of that. So yeah, it's the usually the proper way to doing that. With those libraries, you can have you can have this information. So how should I log? That's after knowing what is logging, and that's some important thing to do, and when should I log, and understanding the log levels that are important to put the right information on the right level to leverage power of other tools in the future as well. How should I do it? What tools I have to my mind? What's the most common usage of that? So I would like to split this topic about how I should log in two things. One is how I should log in Node.js modules or the libraries that you're using, and the logs that you use in your application itself. Okay, so when you're talking about Node.js modules, why? Basically, I separate this because usually this is something that if you're like contributing to open source, or if you are delivering some, even internally, some module to be used by others, there is some standard in Node.js that it's using a really nice named module called debug, because it will be mostly for debugging for the libraries consumers to know when something is happening with your application, and supporting those the ones that are using your library. So you're giving them also information about that. Yeah, so you can use this debug module. It was, or as you can see by the name of the GitHub, it was developed initially by TJ Hollow or something. That's a quite difficult name for me to say. But probably if you're around this Node.js ecosystem for some time, you know that this guy is like a legend. He was the most prolific guy in Node.js for a few years in a row, like writing more code in Sunday morning that you wrote in your whole week usually. But that's also another story. So you can see on the example how the usage of it. It's quite simple. I have implemented into my one old library that I had, that I used to use. It's quite old. It was supporting Node 0.8, Node 0.12 and 4, IOJS 4, I believe. So you can see because of the vars and so on. So it was 5 years old code. So I just add the bug here to give you this information to show you some more proper example. So yeah, one advantage when you're developing something like this here is that you can not only creating these debugs on the main files or the main file that you're exposing, but when you're under that some libraries inside your library, you can also rely on that, and they are inclusive in most of the open source applications. So mostly the libraries are supporting such pattern. Let me show you more how it's used. For example, if you can just try right now and write debug equal star and run your application, and you see that a lot of logs related to those applications, and they follow some patterns using this column that you can specify which applications you want to see specifically. If you just put star, it will show everything. But if you put, for example, Mocha column suite, it will only show the logs for suite. If you put runnable, if you put, in my case, evaluate library, it will just do that. It will show only this main information for you, and you can mostly it's more useful for debugging. It's usually not that useful for having it to your production, unless you might think it's some bug that only happens in production with some library, for example. And another nice feature of this is that it shows the timing of those and how many milliseconds it takes to execute in the end. So it's quite powerful and helpful in cases of debugging. So now talking about more in the 8% of cases, so choosing writing to our own applications. And there is a quite huge number of loggers in Node.js. There is not some de facto standard one. And all of them have their own flavors, their own caveats. So I put in the screen 4 that are the most common used. There are like, I think Winston and Bunyan are the older in this list. I remember to be using Winston for quite a long time ago, and it was even some kind of quest, some dispute about Winston and Bunyan. Some prefer one, some prefers other. But they are the most used ones, like Winston, Bunyan, Log4j.s, and Pinot.js. My personal preference right now is Log4j.s is strongly based on the Log4j library. That's the most used in Java world. But without any doubt, the most used still is Winston. And all of them have their trade-offs and so on, but you can have mostly the same things on them. So you will be able to configure the library to show your log levels. You can configure multiple transports. You can configure plugins and so on. So they're quite useful for you to see how it. They're quite flexible, I would say. So you can do whatever you want. You can deliver to whatever you want. So they will help you. Besides Pinot, Pinot takes a different approach, because all these other 3 and most probably many others leave the power to run the transports of your logs running concurrently with your application. But Pinot takes a different approach, and it's that's why it's the fastest one on that. Because even like if you want to configure some different things, like show some pretty logs or transforming the logs in the between, it takes it off your application. It's not your application should not be responsible for paying for this. So I will show some example in the next slide. So, but basically, talking for Pinot, it uses a different approach for most of the things. So it relies more on the pipe operator in Unix systems, and this approach gives you sometimes 5 times faster than the other solutions. But again, my personal experience for now, it's that I'm using in most of my projects is Log4j.s. So I will give you some example on that. And the main thing that I like in Log4j.s, it's let's show the configuration first. So for getting started with Log4j.s, this is pretty much what you need to do to have some logging into your std out, and you'll see in the console of your application, and with colors. That's of course nice. And you can configure the log level for this appender. It's basically the transport for that, in which level you want, and it can be customizable. So for example, if you want to have different files, one for info, one for errors, and one for whatever you want, you can configure it here with different appenders that they might have different types. For example, std out, std error, or even the files, or sending it directly to your server, your centralization server, and so on. And configuring the levels for that. Also, it has these layouts that you can pre-process the logs that you are sending, attaching some more information or transforming some information that you're sending, some raw objects, and you can filter those informations in these layouts. Here is a simple usage. The thing that I like most in here is that you can define the component that you are using inside when you are getting the logger. So it's quite useful information for you when you see which specific module is giving you this log. And it's quite simple usage, as you see. And when it comes to Pinot, it's also quite the same for configuration, but you will not be configuring the transports or whatever here, because it offers some plugins to take care of that out of the box. So you can see Pinot Pretty, you can see Pinot syslog. That's a standard for servers to have some standard on those logs as well. And it has also integrations with the most popular web frameworks, so you'll be able to see it in action. You will be able to extract the information from them directly. And yet, for the usage, it's pretty much the same. I just changed the importer here, the import here. And one nice thing, it can be used by browsers as well, the Pinot. So just you need to configure some informations when you're creating the logger instance, but it's pretty much it. You can configure some transports even directly for the browser and so on. And you can transform those objects, there are some functions to configure it as well, to transform the information before placing it in the browser. So yeah, I'm running out of time, but it's one of the last slides. So it's nice that you have your logs and so on. I mentioned transports during that, and this one is important thing to think. Where I would like to see these logs. You cannot just connect to your applications every time to see it might be lost sometimes if you're not saving it to somewhere. If you have, for example, multiple instances of your server running, it would be a help to log into all the instances to see where this request get placed and to see the error, for example. So for that, we have log aggregators to centralize those things in a place and providing you more tools to work on that, to search those logs, to apply some rules for metrics and so on that. I listed some of the most popular ones. We have this Elastic Stack that was formerly ELK, Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. We also have Graylog. these two are basically open source. Graylog differs from Elasticsearch because it provides the whole tool belt for log management on one hand, and also provides some powerful searching tools on top of Elasticsearch for those logs, and also offers some quite useful dashboards. On the Elasticstack side, it's again, it's open source. It's but it's separated into many projects that you can connect them to form this thing. Different from Graylog that has just a out-of-the-box solution for this for you. In Elasticsearch, you it will have those tools that I mentioned, like Elasticsearch, to give you power to search your logs, Logstash that could be used to gather the logs from your server and sending it to Elasticsearch, and Kibana for the visualization. And with that, it also offers you some quite useful some other tools around that you could use for investigating some performances, investigate some. There are some tools to detect anomalies based on some AI and so on. There are alertings and so on. And also, usually into your if you don't want to manage by yourself, there are also some commercial tools that offers pretty much the same functionality. They are not open source, but they have clients for most of the languages as well. For example, you can use Logly, LogDNA, Datadog, Splunk, log entries, Papertrail. There are some that you could use for aggregate your logs. And if you're in a cloud environment, that I believe at least a big portion of us are right now, the most popular ones like AWS, GCP, and Azure, they provide such tool directly for you. For example, in AWS, using CloudWatch, it has the log centralization CloudWatch. It also has some metrics on top of it and alerting that you can configure. But just pay some attention because it might be quite expensive depending on how much logs you're producing. And GCP has this stack driver that is also has its own APM on top of it, and you can use its stack driver on multiple clouds. For example, you can get data from your AWS account as well. And Azure has this Azure Monitor that offers the log centralization, metrics, traces, and alerting. The advantage of using those from the cloud providers is that they're usually quite well integrated with the products they have. So you might have the logs from your database, from your applications out of the box in most cases. But again, be aware of the cost of that. So yeah, I'm running much out of time. So, and beyond. So logs are just the beginning. Logs are quite important in software engineers' life because they provide information that you could use for debug your application and understand the behaviors of your application and so on. And when you have it done properly, and I hope I give you some insights to start digging on it and searching more. My idea was to just give you the initial idea so you can go on and search more for that and acquire this knowledge more deeply. And when, as I said, when you have it done properly, you can use other tools around that for detect anomalies, as you see in Elasticsearch that offers such thing. And you can have more performance clues, and depending on what you're logging, you can do much more. So I hope this inspired you to try to treat your logs better and achieve most of them. So thank you very much for being with me here. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. Actually, you are perfectly on time. Thank you for that. We actually have plenty of questions to you, so we will keep them for our Q&A session, which will happen in 80 minutes. Again, thank you very much. I saw the discussion in the chat window, so the topic absolutely burning for our developers. So thank you for sharing with that. We appreciate it very much, and looking forward to see you in 80 minutes in our Q&A session. Thank you, Marcus.